Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our live stream today. My name is Amanda Williams, and joining me is Jim Zobel, the world's expert on General Douglas MacArthur. Now, today we're going to be talking about the court-martial of Billy Mitchell. Now, in 1925, the court-martial of Billy Mitchell captured national attention, and at the center of the controversy was Billy Mitchell, a man today who's regarded as the father of the United States Air Force. Now, we're not really going to get into the reasons for the trial. We have a podcast in the MacArthur podcast series about that already. But in a nutshell, in September 1925, then Brigadier Billy Mitchell, he blames a crash of a Navy blimp on the negligence of Navy leaders, and then he blasts the Army for being similarly ignorant of the potential of air power. Now, for years, he'd been very, very critical of the military's failure to adapt to air power, and this is a bit of a last straw, and he's summoned to Washington, D.C. to stand trial. There's about 8 charges, including conduct prejudicial to good order and military discipline, and then conduct of a nature to bring discredit upon military service. He and his legal counsel turned the trial into a platform to explain his vision, which I think we all agree today was a correct vision of air power, and its future kind of significance of that. But the trial wasn't about the validity of his vision. It was about his behavior. And the trial ends on December 17th, 1925, and he is convicted. And then Major General Douglas MacArthur, he was on the trial. He later describes the order to sit on that court-martial as one of the most distasteful orders that he ever received. He's one of the youngest judges on that court, and he's also a longtime friend of Mitchell. He's also a very ambitious officer, on track possibly in the future to become the future Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. So what we're going to talk about today is MacArthur's role on that court-martial and how he navigated the politics of the trial and whether or not he voted to convict Mitchell. So that was a whole lot. Jim, get us started here. MacArthur is the youngest judge on that court-martial. Give us a sense of where he is in his life and career at that point, and then tell us about the composition of the other judges.
First off, I'm not an expert on anything, as you know. I've just been here for a million years, and so I know a lot more than anybody else. But as far as that goes, yeah, MacArthur is right then he's Third Corps commander. They had just gotten back from the Philippines. He and his wife Louise had been there from 22 till about late 1924, and they came back and were immediately sent to the Fourth Corps command, which was down in Atlanta, but they were only there for a couple of months, and then they come back to Baltimore, and that's where Third Corps is headquartered. And they're going to live at the Rainbow Hill, one of those Trumbull estates that were built for the Stotesburys, which looks very much like the Argonne in France, if you ever go there. But that's where MacArthur is, and that's where he's living. And all of a sudden, he finds out as soon as he gets to Baltimore that that's one of the first things he's going to be doing is sitting on this trial, which he calls the most distasteful order I've ever received. It's like 11 judges. I think there's like 6 major generals and 5 brigadier generals, but it's all these people who have no experience flying airplanes, so to speak, but it's not, the trial isn't about that. It's about conduct on becoming an officer. And as Hap Arnold would say, everybody in the trial knew that except Billy Mitchell. And so these guys are older officers. I think, Howes, Robert Howes, he's graduated in like 1888. I think he fought in the Indian Wars or something like that, before, when he first started out. Most of these guys were in World War I. William Graves had served under Arthur MacArthur in the Philippines. He's the guy that's going to go to Siberia, at the end of World War I. So he's going to be on there. Summerall, who's destined to be the chief of staff. He's the president of it at first. He hates Billy Mitchell because Mitchell had come through Hawaii in 24 and basically said that you're going to get bombed to oblivion. You have no defenses whatsoever. And, ticked off Summerall. Summerall had been MacArthur's corps commander in World War I. So I mean, he's invested with all these people. Robert McCoy is he, you know, all these, he's I think the closest in age to MacArthur, but he graduated in like 1897, so he's like 6 years older. He had been the regimental commander in the Rainbow Division of the New York regiment there. I mean, so all these guys know each other. MacArthur knows them all, but they're just a lot older. I think two of the guys graduated in the 1880s, and the rest of them are from the 1890s. Bernard Irwin, I think, was like an 89. Howes was like 88, and the rest of these guys are like 1890 and whatnot. But a lot of them have a lot of infantry experience, cavalry experience, and most of them had been in World War I as well, and saw that it was infantry that won the war, and so they not only look at Billy Mitchell as being vociferous in his vocal abilities, but they also see him as being wrong, about air power, because they didn't see that in World War I, and they don't really see the future as Billy Mitchell does,
Then Representative Fiorello LaGuardia of New York gives testimony at the trial, and he's a very interesting figure. He had complained very, very publicly that he believed that Mitchell would not get a fair trial because the judges were part of the establishment that Mitchell was challenging, or, as you've kind of already touched on, they didn't agree with him at all in terms of his vision. But LaGuardia has something very interesting to say about MacArthur, though. Can you tell us about his testimony?
Yeah, that's when he's on the stand. The thing was is from what everybody says, but Washington was a very dull town. There was nothing to do there, and so this trial becomes like the happening, the place you want to be, the place you want to be seen. And a lot of the reporters, talk about this because, Mitchell turns it into an expose on why we need air power rather than defending himself against these charges. And so it becomes kind of like every time anybody says something, the whole court like explodes in laughter. And the one reporter was saying, I'm thinking that foot stamping is coming next, where everybody's just going to be heeing and hawing and stamping their feet and laughing uproariously at all these things. So LaGuardia gets up there, and he's a character. He had flown with Mitchell in World War I, and he says this board is not going to do anything that's not conducive to what the general staff wants. And he says, of course, I said that before I knew that Douglas MacArthur was going to be on the board. So everybody knows already that MacArthur is not this guy that goes along with the thinking of the general staff. They know that he's been very vocal in his own career the whole time. And even Burke Davis will say that. He's the guy who has, he gets all the official transcripts, and he writes the book about it. He writes in there, MacArthur was uncharacteristically silent for the entire trial. And so all these people know he's a talker. They know he's, somebody who always goes against the grain. And it's just, they're all pretty much remarkable about why MacArthur is kind of not saying anything, the whole trial. But when LaGuardia said that, they said it took like about 3 or 4 minutes to calm the courtroom down. MacArthur's just sitting there like, what?
So Mitchell tells his counsel at one point that MacArthur looks like he's been drawn through a knothole. So I think, even though there's these kind of funny moments, it's obviously a very stressful experience for MacArthur as well. And we mentioned earlier that he was an officer that a lot of people said, there's a bright future in front of this guy. A lot of the judges, as you mentioned, had been criticized, or by LaGuardia and other people, because obviously they didn't agree with Mitchell. And they had been even in some cases personally criticized by Mitchell, or some of these judges were just straight up Pershing men, and Pershing himself was not a fan of Mitchell. And then, of course, a lot of these guys on the panel can exert a lot of influence over MacArthur's future career. If they don't like Mitchell, and if it seems that the verdict is already set in everybody's minds, how did MacArthur navigate this situation, with a verdict which is pretty much a foregone conclusion?
Yeah, the talk about MacArthur, looking like he's drawn, I think he's he calls Billy Mitchell his closest and most intimate friend, and for MacArthur, who through his life doesn't really seem to have a lot of close friends, that's saying something. And their families are totally intermingled. His grandfather was best friends with Mitchell's father or grandfather, Alexander Mitchell, one of the richest people in Milwaukee ever. And then his father, Arthur MacArthur, is best friends with Mitchell's dad, John Lendrum Mitchell. They both served in the 24th Wisconsin. These people grow up together. Supposedly MacArthur, dated both Janet and Harriet, Mitchell's sisters. And so this is something that is agonizing to him because, like you said, he's up, in line for chief of staff. Everybody knows how smart he is. Everybody is totally behind it. Summerall is a great admirer of MacArthur. Menaher, who was the chair, the chief of the air service that fought with Mitchell so much. He was MacArthur's division commander in World War I. You've got Pershing, who's very much antagonistic to Mitchell. All these people are instrumental as to where MacArthur's going, and so that, I think, is the reason why he's silent. The reason why he doesn't say anything the entire trial. And there's a letter that comes to MacArthur in the 1960s, and it's from this friend of Mitchell's, and who was there with Mitchell at the entire trial. And he said he remembered every morning MacArthur and Mitchell, hey, how's it going? They're shaking hands. All the other judges are like, what's going on with this? And then the guy even says, we went out to lunch, during the trial. After the trial, MacArthur and Mitchell, go out to lunch. So I imagine it's very unnerving for MacArthur, knowing that he's got this career that he's working on, and then knowing, that. And then MacArthur would even say that, the thing wasn't so much what he had done, but it was the violence of his language, because he was just calling them all idiots, incompetent, criminal, negligence, things like that. And so I think that's why MacArthur has that whole look the whole time, and everybody notices it. And like you said, I think he's worried about betraying his best friend as well as furthering his own career.
It's a very complicated situation for him. Well, shifting gears a little bit, obviously the trial attracted a ton of media attention, and it also attracted a lot of socialites. MacArthur's wife at the time, Louise Cromwell Brooks, is a prominent attendee, and there are reports that he is so distracted by her that he can't really concentrate on the trial. Now, we've just talked about how pained he is by the whole process. Is it true that he's very distracted by his wife as well during the trial?
Well, I don't know. They've been married 3 years, and their marriage is going to end in a couple of years. We know all the troubles they had in the Philippines, a lot of fights between the two. So how much of that is real? I don't know. The thing is that Louise is very good friends with Mitchell's second wife, Elizabeth Trumbull. When Mitchell was on that tour of the Pacific, it was also his honeymoon, and he took Elizabeth with him when they go to Hawaii, and then they went to the Philippines. And they said when the ship came through the San Bernardino Straits, MacArthur had a plane, because MacArthur's the head of the Philippine department at that time, and he had a plane fly over the ship with a big banner that said, "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell." And so they come and stay with them in Manila, and Louise becomes very good friends with Elizabeth. And it's said that they show up at the courtroom arm in arm every day,
Wow.
and so it's this big, and the only reason Louise wants to be there is because, like you said, that's the place to be seen, in Washington. And they say that there's a lot of girls that are showing up to this trial because they know all these young available Army officers are all there, and it's a place to be seen and be noticed. But as well, you've got this family dynamic that's going on with Louise and Elizabeth. But as well, Billy Mitchell's first wife is there at the trial every day with her father and Harriet Mitchell. So this is a really weird scene to have the first wife with her dad, and it seems like they're sitting right behind Billy Mitchell as well. And here's the thing, MacArthur at one time in his life was in love with Harriet. So, I mean, what's he thinking the whole time? There's Harriet, there's my wife, I better look at my wife the whole time so she doesn't see me maybe stealing a glance at Harriet.
Oh, goodness.
So how much does that have to do with it,
Right. I mean, it's such an interesting trial we're talking about the personality side, and obviously from the actually what was going on there, the more serious side. But I didn't know some of this stuff about the personalities that were there. That's really, really cool, Jim. So December 17th, 1925, Mitchell is found guilty. Do we know how MacArthur voted?
He says a lot of different things over the years. People would write him and they would get a response saying, as a member of that court, I'm sworn to secrecy. I'm not allowed to say anything about, how I voted in that trial. It came out shortly after the trial, this story about the newsman sweeping the trash can, and they find all the different votes and they compare them, and they say that MacArthur voted for acquittal. Fiorella LaGuardia was big at spreading that story. In 1945, Alexander Wiley, who was a senator, was trying to get a posthumous Medal of Honor for Mitchell. And he wrote to MacArthur saying, I've always felt that you voted for acquittal, in this case, and that you were good friends with Billy Mitchell, and, will you support this endeavor that I'm trying to do to get the Medal of Honor? And MacArthur wrote him back that you have remembered the trial as it was, and that he says, what you have stated is the truth. Billy Mitchell knew that I did that and would, say to me many times, after that, how much he thanked me for that. Billy Mitchell would say the same thing to George Kinney as well. When Kinney was MacArthur's air chief, he told him that, because Kinney was a big Mitchell, protege, as a lot of these guys were. And he said that he met with Mitchell at Middleburg, that plantation that he lived at for the end of his years. And Mitchell told him that I really, Doug, a big thank you for what he did there back in 25. But the thing is does he really vote for acquittal? I think, in his memoirs, MacArthur says, I did my best to save him from disgrace. And Mitchell wasn't drummed out of the service. He was given a suspension and a suspension of money, and MacArthur will never say, yes, I voted for acquittal, except to Wiley, that senator, because other people will write him and ask him, and he'll say, check out the Lee and Henschel book that just came out, and there in the book, both of Mitchell's sisters told Henschel, no, we didn't believe MacArthur voted to convict. We believed that he voted for acquittal. And so they'll say, look to this book. And then they'll write him again, and he'll say, I did my best to save him from disgrace, never saying I voted for acquittal. And then Red Blake writes him in 1960, the Army football coach, who MacArthur is very good friends with. And Red Blake says, this topic has come up again. Did you vote for acquittal? And MacArthur doesn't answer it. Does he tell him vocally something? We don't know, but there's no answer, and MacArthur would usually answer those things. And so it comes down to we don't really know. I mean, there's that point where he said he did, but we also know, like you were saying before, does he have to go along to ensure that he'll be chief of staff? He'll admit that that one time that's what happened to Senator Wiley, but with other people he doesn't say that. He just says, I did my best to help him. He was my best friend. You're correct. Even Janet Mitchell's son, this guy Mackey, writes to MacArthur and says, my mom always thought that you voted for acquittal. And MacArthur writes back and says, tell your mom recollects everything right. I did my best to save him from disgrace. He doesn't say, I voted for acquittal. He says that I did my best to save him from disgrace. And so I look at kind of maybe that's what it was. He was the guy that kept them from drumming out of the service. But, did he vote for acquittal? I don't know. I don't know. And no one does.
It is true, though, that in terms of the penalty, I mean, Mitchell gets off much easier than he could have. So, I suppose it is possible MacArthur played a role there, but obviously there are other people later on that do some stuff as well. So after the trial, Mitchell's counsel tells the press, Billy Mitchell is the John Brown of 1925. They think they have silenced him, but his ideas will go marching on, and those who have crucified him will be the first to put his aviation suggestions into use. That's a big statement. In World War II, does MacArthur ever look back to the trial? Does he ever say anything again about Mitchell's ideas in terms of how they relate to the war?
Well, George Kinney, in his book, he says that, MacArthur, admits that he did a lot of wrong things. When he was chief of staff, he should have, voted differently on air power, because he becomes a total, air power advocate. And as well, during the 1930s, it's MacArthur that, is like, yes, let's build the B-17. This is a ship that is a long range bomber like Mitchell had envisioned. But yet MacArthur cuts out a lot of other air programs as well. And I think Jeffrey Perret or, D. Clayton James, one of them said, no wonder, that Mitchell probably had a hard time deciphering how MacArthur was thinking the whole time during the trial, because MacArthur has, various opposing ideas about air power as well. We know that Jean, in her oral history, said that when the Bismarck Sea battle happens in March of 1943, and air power wipes out that Japanese convoy that pretty much changes the entire ground war in New Guinea, that Jean said that the whole time MacArthur was walking around the apartment, just all of a sudden being like, Billy Mitchell, because everything, in MacArthur's mind, Mitchell had been proven correct, by this action at the Bismarck Sea. Mitchell never envisions aircraft carriers. He's not a guy for aircraft carriers. He says, that you'll have them, you can maybe build some land, mass, like the Chinese are doing in the South Central, Sea, and building these air bases on coral reefs, things like that. And that's the way Mitchell pretty much envisioned it. I don't think he really saw these floating platforms, that we're gonna take. I think MacArthur, he's not really an advocate of Mitchell until after Clark Field. Then he's a full, convert to what air power can do, and it's the Japanese that teach him.
Okay. Any final thoughts, Jim?
No, that was kind of fun though, because like you said, there was a lot of things I hadn't seen before, about it. So it was kind of neat to, find out all those things. Thank you.
Well, thank you always.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, but thank you for always sharing your expertise with us.